back to another Doctor Who Big Finish review. Today I'm going to be taking a look at another release from the Doctor Who Unit New Series line, taking a look at Unit Encounters, which literally got released in November 2017. So firstly, before I even start this review, I'd just like to apologise for how long it's actually took for this review to take place. Generally just as certain things going on, because this was technically near enough released in December, as I do believe it was released at the very back end of November. I think that I had a little bit of a slump in filming back then, a few things did happen, so kind of with the way that this channel is set out and the amount of things that I do cover, once one thing is missed out, it takes quite a while to come back to it because there is quite a demanding amount of things that I do cover on this channel at the minute. So yeah, Unit Encounters, we're finally here and we're finally taking a look at it, which is only a few months before the next series was released, so hey, since we're not that behind. Firstly, and as always, in the description below, I will leave a link to go buy this release from the Big Finish website. It's currently out now, obviously for the physical price of £30, because the pre-order price is no longer a thing because it's took that long to actually film this video, and the download is £25. So yeah, this is a little bit more pricey than the other releases, solely down to the fact of when I'm filming it. However, if you're interested by what I say in this review, the trailer is available on the Big Finish website, so I do recommend checking that out if you are, as I say, interested about what I say in this review. General format for Unit Encounters is a little bit similar to the previous series, however, we're throwing it up a little bit this time and doing a few different things. So as always, we've got 4 episodes for this series, however, unlike the previous box sets where we've had the rather unusual format of essentially having a big blockbuster sort of type thing that is a massive film with different ideas going on, and it is essentially one story all the way throughout. This series does something slightly different and adopts kind of the Dark Eyes Doom Coalition format of having one sort of loose thread that is sort of sum between 4 stories that in fact do completely different things, have completely different settings and completely different villains. So it's a little bit more of a classic series format, and something for which that is very different to the previous series that we've seen so far in this line. I still, even after listening to it, I don't know how I feel about this. I think that with the other box sets, it was really nice to have this rather big blockbustery kind of format of having them going to do different things and having a massive amount of time to actually have this plot developed for 4 separate stories. However, with this one, it kind of goes back to basics. I guess you could sort of treat this box set as a little bit of a jumping on point, a little bit of a pilot for the other series maybe. I don't particularly know, but yeah, it's a little bit of an odd one. However, I kind of like it. So taking a look at the episode list for this series now, the first episode is The Dalek Transaction, written by Matt Fitton. The second episode is Invocation, written by Roy Gill. Episode 3 is The Sontaran Project, written by Andrew Smith. And then the series finale is False Negative, written by John Dorney. And the whole series is directed by Ken Bentley. Of course, the producer is David Richardson, so pretty much a regular for the Big Finish team. I think that the only new name for this series is in fact Roy Gill, who did the second story. I don't think I've ever reviewed anything with his name credited in. So yeah, it is nice to see that this box set has actually brought on a new writer, because something that I've noticed with the previous series has very much been shared between Matt Fitton, John Dorney, and I think Guy Adams in there as well, and possibly Andrew Smith. So it has pretty much been those reoccurring Big Finish names over and over again. So maybe this box set would have been a nice opportunity to bring on some new writers, much like how we have the short story format, and bring on a few people that maybe are inexperienced with audio dramas or something like that, and letting them actually go into the Unit New Series universe. However, it seems to be that we've got pretty much the regular writers coming back for this release, which I guess could have been a missed opportunity, but at the same time, I think that all the writers for this release did a pretty decent job. And also briefly taking a look at the characters for this release now, going through them quite quickly, because the Unit series is in fact got quite a large cast. We've got Gemma Redgrave as Kate Stewart, once again, similar compliments with the other ones. It's really nice to see that her character is sort of blossoming out, doing new things. How a daughter of the actual Brigadier from the TV series, I do tend to expect. However, I think that she could have maybe just done a little bit more. We have Ingrid Oliver as Osgood, or Petrel Osgood, or whatever her name is at the very beginning. I think that generally Ingrid Oliver, once again, has a few nice moments. We do get a little bit more development with her character. However, it is nice to see that Big Finish are developing her a little bit further, letting her go and do different things that the TV show didn't allow her to do, such as a character that I'm coming on to now, being James Joyce, Captain Josh Carter. And I think that he is pretty much now confirmed as Osgood's boyfriend. I think it is pretty much a relationship that is waiting to blossom, and I think that that is a nice effect. I think that developing her character and his character forward, and actually having that relationship in there within Unit, is something quite nice, quite modern at the same time as well, kind of having that employment type of job relationship thing. I think that that could maybe backfire in the future series, I don't particularly know, but yeah, it's nice to see that they're getting this character that we had sort of started from Doctor Who, and let them go and independent sort ofly go and do their own thing. I have Raymond Tickram, who plays Colonel Shindy, who is once again somebody that we've seen in the previous series. So I think that generally his character has maybe been left out a little bit in the previous series, partly because I can't really remember his character much in the previous series. I think that he may have had a little bit more of a pivotal role in Unit Assembled. However, I can't particularly remember him at all in the previous series. I don't really think that he might have had a big role to play, so it's nice to see throughout this one that he does have a little bit more of an important role, especially in the Sontaran episode, where he in fact has a little bit more of a frontline role to play, because the other characters aren't particularly involved in that story too much. And I do believe that the main reason why he may be a little bit more of a pivotal character in this release is because of the absence of Sam Bishop, played by Warren Brown. I think that may generally just be down to him doing other things and having other commitments at the time of this box set. Yeah, he's pretty much not in this release. So yeah, I think that we do get a few references here and there that he's gone off to do sort of his own mission by himself. But yeah, he isn't in this release whatsoever. He does come into the next one in Cyber Reality, which I'll come on to in a little bit. But yeah, I think that he may have been a little bit of a replacement for his character for this series. Maybe a little bit of scripting, reworking went around in there to sort of involve him a little bit more. But yeah, he is absent for this release, which could be a shame if you like his character. But at the same time, it's nice to see this character of Colonel Shindy actually developed a little bit further. Now moving on to the actual stories for this release. Now, I do always come across a little bit of a struggle when it comes to the Unit News series, because I don't know whether or not to review them as separate stories or one big massive story. However, with this one, it is pretty much 4 separate stories, so that makes it a little bit easier for me. This series is pretty much, here's a few ideas that we've wanted to chuck at the fan in previous series. However, we've not had the equivalent of a plot that could last 4 episodes to kind of benefit the whole story and actually drag it out that long. So I kind of see this series as a little bit of an experimental one, going and doing the different things that they couldn't have done with the 4 series format and then developing that into sort of separate stories. It's a little bit like the 4th Doctor range, kind of having that 1 hour story that is a little bit shorter. So of course the first episode for this release is the Dalek Transaction, written by Matt Finn, and this episode is a rather unusual one. Of course we do have a Dalek in there, hence the title, the Dalek Transaction. But yeah, I think that this episode is a little bit more Unit actually getting a Dalek and having a little bit of fun with that. This episode is a little bit more of it into the Dalek format, where you have just one Dalek for the whole story, and then that Dalek is sort of developing and mutating and going a little bit insane. So we have seen this idea 4 different Doctor Who stories actually played with quite a few times over the past few years, especially most recently in the Time War. I think it was the Echoes of War episode, where you had that Dalek and they were escorting the 8th Doctor and the companion throughout that rainforest in the first Time War box set. But yeah, that is a little bit like that story. I must say there was a few elements of that episode that I did see reflected in this one. The most important part of this piece is the way that the Dalek actually comes out of the shell, much like something that we've actually seen twice upon a time, and it decides to go and try and basically kill absolutely everything. And what I like about this one is that it's basically the idea of Daleks are ruthless, and no matter what, even if they're below everybody else, even though they're the supreme beings and all that, they will find a way to kill absolutely everybody. And yeah, I like that. This episode does have consequences, and there was a moment at the very end of this story where I did honestly think, wow, I didn't expect that. That is very good, very pivotal, and actually sort of teaches Unit a lesson, kind of. So it does actually show how ruthless the Daleks are, and yeah, it sort of shows how much they are willing to sacrifice themselves as well in order to make the Daleks look a little bit more supreme. It's a little bit of a black market for alien tech, kind of, which is something that is experimented with throughout this series on a number of occasions, and I think that it's an interesting concept. However, I just expected a little bit more. I think that Matt Finn could have maybe put a little bit more of his own ideas into this story, because I think especially throughout the Time War and even the War Doctor series as well, there was a few elements where I've seen in the past the elements of the Daleks and sort of their customs and the way that they live life and sort of what makes sort of a true Dalek. One of the main things is actually standing out to me is, I think, in the 2nd series of the War Doctor, where we had that experimental Dalek fraction that was testing really what it was, what the actual elements were to be a Dalek, and then they were mutating that a little bit further. I mean, that whole concept of impurity. I think that with this episode, it would have been nice to see that develop with a little bit further, showing how this Dalek maybe thought it was impure and how it needed to destroy itself or something. I don't particularly know. I think that this episode had a nice premise behind it. However, it could have just gone a little bit further, and then I just kind of expected a little bit more. But still, overall, generally a nice opening piece, and it is nice to finally see Kate Stewart going up against a Dalek. Second episode for this release is Invocation, written by Roy Gill, and as I was previously saying, I do believe that this is a completely new credit for this release, and it's nice to see a little bit more of a ghost story, once again going back to that sort of more traditional Unit, where you have this manor house that Unit has used in the very past, and then the Brigadier was involved in the sort of history of Unit, and we have this idea of sort of this paranormal thing going on, where you have this grey man that is lurking in this house, and it is pretty much your stereotypical Doctor Who does a spooky house, and it is a Halloween special. It is literally set on on Halloween, so that is nice. And yeah, I like the way that this episode is that stereotypical ghost story. However, once again, it involves Kate in the story a little bit more personally. We finally get a little bit more development with her, going into the backstory of her character and showing how she had this relationship with, of course, her father and the Brigadier, because he's a very big role in Doctor Who, something of which that surprisingly, considering that he is a very big role, we've never really gone into it too much. I think that they've definitely focused on making a character of Kate in her own right, rather than referring to Brigadier Alistair Gordon Lethbridge Stewart sort of a little bit more often, which I do see why they've been doing that, because I think it's definitely a little bit more important to develop her character rather than her backstory. But at the same time, it is nice to see that Invocation actually goes and does the stereotypical ghost story, and then once again kind of adds a unit twist, the way that we have this idea of a satellite at the very start of the story that has been transmitting throughout sort of time today. We have these rather odd signals that are being transported around Earth, such as ones coming from Russia, where you have this odd radio signal that nobody really knows what's happening with it. It's just sort of a pulsating sound, like a beep. You know, it just goes every so often. Some of them, in some cases, have been going for like 30 years, and I think it is a rather interesting concept, something which, as I say, very much does happen within reality today, and I think that having that idea, however, sort of reflecting that on a Latin sort of radio wave signal thing, and then referring the supernatural into that as well, it's something which I would like to see Doctor Who do a little bit more often. But yeah, it's nice, experimental story, rather fun. Osgood has a few nice moments in there as well. However, something I noticed was there was a few occasions throughout this one where it was a little bit self-explanatory. The vocabulary that was used, especially by Kate Stewart at some parts, where she drops her phone and then she has this interaction with the Grey Man, it is a little bit sort of, oh, it is reaching out for me, kind of the stereotypical thing that people who don't listen to Big Finish expect from the audio drama format, where you have this very sort of slapdash vocabulary that is very much saying what is going on in front of the actual person being affected, because you can't see what's going on. So normally with Big Finish you don't get that. I think that they are very well written where you actually can imagine in your head what is going on. But I did notice throughout this story that there was a few moments where Kate Stewart was saying, oh, it is reaching out for me, it is right in front of my face. It was a little bit, you wouldn't say that in real life. I don't know if that was an actual sort of effect of her trying to relive the memories in her own mind and maybe trying to get her to remember or something. The next episode is the Sontaran Project, written by Andrew Smith. Now this episode is pretty much the inevitable one. I think that it's actually quite a surprise that we've not had a full box set dedicated to the Sontarans yet in the new series, because I think that especially with the new series fraction of UNIT, we do get very much this tight relationship between UNIT and the Sontarans. I think it's something which we've not really seen too often. However, they are always referred to in flashbacks, and it's the inevitable one. However, once again we get the Sontarans going and doing a slightly different thing. Once again, Colonel Shindy is involved, which is part of the reason why I think that Warren Brown may have been absent for this release, and they may have needed to do some tweaking sort of later on in the scripting for this series, because once again he is repeating throughout the story where we have Kate Stewart and Colonel Shindy, and Osgood goes off to a scientific convention thing, and she gets caught up with this idea of a person that she knew from a sort of previous career that she's had, and he decides to take her back to his laboratory and show around all this lovely alien tech, and it turns out that this person has changed very much from the old person that Osgood used to know, and we have this backfiring, and it turns out that once again that these people are working for a black market of people that do alien artifacts and sort of trade them. It's a little bit of a reference to the first story, and we do have that once again, that reoccurring theme in the fourth story as well, so it is a little bit once again like that Doom Coalition idea where you have these 4 independent stories. However, there's something intertwined throughout them that kind of links them all together. However, it's something that is very loose, and you could watch these essentially in any order and still sort of understand it. But yeah, this episode has the Sontarans once again took to a slightly different format, where you have this whole idea of the cloning background the Sontarans have. Percussions are kind of the way the Sontarans essentially duplicate each other and clone each other, because they are this clone race, and the way that this can backfire. And what if essentially you had the humans trying to recreate this for their own purposes, and then sort of create, I guess, their own fake knockoff Sontarans, which I think when actually saying this out loud, it sounds pretty decent. I think that this idea of having essentially the way that you have action figures and kind of the way that those are knocked off by sort of cheaper companies in China, sort of using cheaper versions of the sculpts and things like that, I think that is technically where we're getting this episode, however with an actual alien race. And when applying this to the Sontarans, this very much sort of war-bred species, I think that this is quite nice. I think that the way that once again that idea of pure purity is questioned. And once again, I think this episode kind of not necessarily failed to push that a little bit further. How I think that this series could have had the potential to in fact actually develop this and actually go, what if we had these two different fractions of Sontaran? Kind of the idea that we had in 80s Doctor Who with the Daleks. We had the pure Daleks and the impure Daleks, and they're kind of going up against each other. Maybe they could have had a whole series dedicated to these new version of Sontarans that the humans have created, fighting against the other versions of Sontarans that have invaded the Earth. And this episode very much sees Sontarans and UNIT working together in a little bit of an alliance to try and figure out what's happened to one of their commanders that has been taken by this unknown company in order to be cloned over and over again. A similar thing to the Dalek transaction, where I think that this episode could essentially be developed into another story and maybe a full 4-length series. But to be quite honest, I would be surprised, considering that this series has been actually sort of rebranded for a whole 4 more box sets, including this one, Cyber Reality, and then we've got 2 more box sets after this. I'm surprised if one of those 2 box sets isn't going to be a full-on Sontaran invasion, because I've expected it by now, to be honest. I think that will definitely happen at some point. So yeah, I'm guessing that this one may be a little bit of a prequel to a 4-part Sontaran series happening at some point in the future. Who knows? I'm just sort of speculating. And then the series finale for this series, which isn't necessarily much of a series finale, as I say, because all of these episodes are kind of independent in their own way. This episode is written by John Dorney, and it is False Negative, and it is a really bloody weird one. It is honestly one of those stories that I kind of expect to see within classic series 1 to 50 Doctor Who, where I wouldn't imagine this getting along very well with a Big Finish new listener, because it's got that idea of where you've got duplicates of people that are playing the same role. So you've got several Osgoods, several Kate Stewarts, several Colonel Shindys, and several Josh Carters in there as well. So naturally, because this is the audio format, it can get a little bit confusing, especially for a new listener. So yeah, if you are a new listener, I would be warned about this one, but at the same time, it's really experimental. I do love the way that this episode actually reflects that of sort of Inferno to an extent. In fact, it is pretty much Doctor Who does Inferno again, however, within the new series and within the UNIT new team. And I think that is a nice idea, because we have this a different sort of parallel universe thing where you have different versions of UNIT, where some are more fascist than others, a little bit of corruption going throughout. For example, they go to this universe where Osgood and Josh Carter are essentially plotting against absolutely everybody in UNIT. I would have imagined this actually being developed a little bit further, even seeing this sort of more evil version of Kate Stewart sort of going up against Colonel Shindy, where you have a little bit of backfire, a little bit of tension between them, and then you have this sort of more evil, rather sexualized version of Josh Carter, as well as this rather sexualized version of Osgood. They're in a relationship together, and they are very touchy-feely, and you get pretty much this workplace relationship once again, however exaggerated, much like how we don't have in this UNIT new series we actually sort of got to know throughout this past few box sets. I think that just having these ideas very much as false negative idea, as the title of this episode suggests, we have these moments where you wouldn't necessarily feel within the actual series that we've seen so far. However, what if this happened? What if these characters were completely different? What if we kind of changed up the characteristics of the main protagonists that we've had, like more like a dictatorship, even where Kate Stewart is referred to as the leader? It's a little bit uncomforting, not gonna lie, where you have this whole box set that is essentially these people that you've knew now for quite a long time, and then seeing these pretty much polar opposite versions of their character sort of shouting against each other and causing tension and killing other people. Yeah, it's a really unusual, rather uncomforting, but at the same time I think that John Dorney is really good at recreating these different characters and actually having modern relationships in there as well. I got this one where you have that, as I say, very over-sexualized relationship between Josh Carter and Osgood. At the very start of the story, you do get a moment where you think, hang on, what? Is this UNIT new series, or is this Torchwood? You do think the lines are being pushed a little bit, the boundaries are getting a little bit pushed also, which I think is nice to see that Big Finish are doing that, definitely developing it into its own series. And it just feels that John Dorney actually knows what relationships and humans and people actually feel like, and sort of how they want to knock out Sam Bishop from the rest of UNIT, because he's the only one that knows what's going on, and he's basically the weak point between their plan and their big cunning plan to sort of rise up in power. And I think that is very much an idea, maybe very James Bondy, I guess, kind of sort of, as I say, that idea of corruption. I think that John Dorney pretty much captures that really nicely, and it is really interesting to see that played with throughout this series, and something of which I'd like to see John Dorney do a little bit more in the future. And he's very much creeping up in my ranking of favourite Big Finish writers, because I think that he can actually portray real human aspects really nicely. So overall for Unit Encounters, it is a really unusual one because I kind of went into this release and assumed it was going to be a little bit of a big fish new listener, because very much as I've stressed in the previous reviews, if you are a new series listener who is very much just getting into Big Finish, this can be a little bit of a daunting format, especially as seen in the previous series where you essentially have this 4-hour blockbuster format with this massive idea of either having the silence in there or unit assembled in the other series, where Big Finish are slowly bringing this series into their own right, and I think that this series is definitely very much getting a little bit more complex than I actually ever imagined this series would do. I think that Big Finish are definitely throwing a few new ideas in there, especially with this series. It is very experimental. As I say, that is a main word that I guess could sum up actually this series as a whole, because all of the stories actually go and do something different and actually go and, as I say, experiment with the different themes of having these different plots that wouldn't necessarily be able to happen throughout the whole big massive 4 blockbuster format. However, just having 1-hour stories dedicated to them works rather nicely. However, at the same time, I think that a few points in this series actually fail to sort of push it to the next level, so it would go and do something a little bit different. Sort of, mainly for me, the Dalek transaction, it would have been nice to maybe go into the ethics of Daleks a little bit more, or Enforce Negative, maybe even having a whole box set developing this idea of a fascist version of Unit. This series is kind of testing the waters. I could imagine a lot of these formats, even as I said, the Sontaran idea, I think that all of those could in fact be applied to other series, so maybe that is the idea for this series. It is testing the waters for next box sets to come, but I think that the thing that will happen with this box set, and the thing that's going to fall victim to, is the fact that this box set is pretty much slap right between Unit Assembled, where you've got classic series Doctor Who meets new series Doctor Who, you've got Katie Manning, you've got Sergeant Benton, you've got Mikey Yates, and then you've got the Unit New series in there as well, along with Silurians and Sea Devils. And then on the opposite side of this release, you've got Derek Jacobi and the new series Cybermen pretty much doing a whole cyber invasion. So you've got these two pretty much massive big ideas, and then in the very middle you've got Unit Encounters, which I think is going to, in the future, it will actually sort of make this box set not really feel very good. I think that that's the thing that will happen. I think that isn't necessarily a fault within this box set in itself, but I think that generally it's going to fall victim to the fact of surely where it's placed within the series. But in reality, it is in fact probably going to be a rather underestimated one. I think this episode has a few really nice ideas in them, and it is great to see Kate Stewart going up against the Daleks. It's great to see Kate Stewart also with the Sontarans as well, and also just having the idea of a ghost story. It's something which I love Unit for and love classic series Doctor Who for, so that's very much an area for me that I do enjoy. And also, this box set is maybe one of those for the new series listener as well, somebody of which that is daunted by the 4-hour format. This box set is definitely very much a jumping on point to those people that are more used to the sort of smaller format, and generally want to test the waters with different formats of the Unit new series a little bit more as well. So yeah, this is a little bit of a more testy water story. I do quite like that. I think that this series definitely actually needed that to kind of develop it a bit further, and I can kind of imagine where the series is going to go. So yeah, I'm very much looking forward to Cyber Reality, because it's got Derek Jacobi in there, especially after the wonderful War Master series that I did absolutely adore. That series has got high hopes on my list for me, and due to me taking a long time to actually film this review, that in fact isn't that long to go, so yeah, until that is actually released. So I guess you will see me all review that at some point in the future. But yeah, generally, if you have any questions about this release, then do leave them in the description, because I can imagine that this release will in fact raise quite a few questions, because it is generally a really unusual one. However, for that reason, I do quite like it. I think that this may have a sort of soft spot in my heart because it is an experimental one, and naturally I do like experimental Doctor Who. So yeah, it's a little bit one of those ones where you will either like it or hate it. That's all for this review. Hope you've enjoyed it, and I guess I'll see you all in another video at some point in the future, when no doubt I'll be reviewing more Doctor Who Big Finish, because I have got a few to catch up on recently. But yeah, I will see you all in the next video. Bye for now.